Hey scientists, it's me, Jessica Power from Kansas City Public Schools, one of the science curriculum coordinators. We're back today with more science, but guess what? We're not talking about life science this week. We've spent a lot of time in the last few weeks talking about life sciences and plants and animals. We're going to switch gears this week and talk about Earth and space science. Now here's what's fascinating about Earth and space science. There is still so much that we don't know about space. But we can't focus on what we don't know. Let's talk about things that we do know. So scientists, this week we're focusing on day and night. Now I don't know if you've noticed, but currently the season's starting to change and it's fall or autumn. And we've just had our autumn equinox. Now, something that's interesting about the autumn equinox is that you're going to start to notice that the amount of daylight during the day is starting to get shorter and shorter and shorter. And then we'll have daylight savings time and we'll be off a little bit and then we'll jump back into not having too much daylight. But scientists, before we can talk about the autumn equinox and before we can talk about why the daylight is starting to change and why it's shorter in the winter and fall and longer in the spring and summer, I need us to know why we have day and why we have night. And so we're going to focus on a few things today, scientists. We're going to focus on day, night, axis, and rotation. Those are our 4 keywords today. So I'm going to show you a really quick picture of Earth. Now, you might be familiar with Earth. What do you notice about Earth? You might notice that it's a globe, or looks like a circle in this book. You might notice that the continents are facing up and down, right? Up and down. You may notice that North Pole is all the way up here and South Pole is at the very bottom. But scientists, the Earth doesn't actually sit this way in space. So let's look at a globe. Now scientists, the Earth actually sits on what's called an axis, meaning that it has a tilt. So this is a globe. And you'll notice this red line that runs through the globe. That red line is called the equator. Now, based on what I showed you in the book, you would think the Earth would sit like this. So the equator runs through evenly. But it doesn't. It actually sits on a tilt. Now, scientists, we are focused today on the words day, night, axis, and rotation. The North Pole of Earth, that very center dot at the top, and the South Pole of Earth, where my little spinner's at the bottom, there's a straight imaginary line that runs through that. And that line is called the axis, and it runs through the very center. You'll see back here on the chart I've created for us today, the axis runs straight through the center of Earth. And as I mentioned, since the Earth sits on a tilt, it's not straight up and down, it's shifted. We'll talk more about tilt next week. For today, we're just focused on rotation, axis, day, and night. So the Earth has this axis point, right? And during the course of a 24-hour day, the Earth does this thing called rotating. Now scientists, to you, it probably looks like I'm just spinning a globe. And I am. A rotation, or rotating, is simply an object turning or spinning on an axis. So as you can see, the axis that runs through Earth is the point at which the Earth spins around. Now it takes the Earth about 24 hours to make a complete spin. So if I put my finger on Tanzania, right here in Africa, and I spin the globe around, one full rotation, back to where I started, that would be 24 hours. Well, it's actually like 23.93 hours, but we count it 24. So let me do that again. This time, let's pick Brazil in South America, okay? My finger starting here. It's gonna make one full rotation, back to where I started, and that's 24 hours. So in 24 hours here in Kansas City, we experience daytime and we experience nighttime. But this globe isn't helping me with day and night. So let's go back to our chart. So scientists, we get sunlight from the sun, as we know that, right? And that sunlight shines down, and we feel that and we experience that during the daytime. When we're experiencing daytime, that means that the Earth is directly shining light where we live. So you'll notice, scientists, that I actually shaded half of this globe darker, and the other half I left blank. Now for our point of reference, I went ahead and made this North America and South America. So you can see that right now, and this is actually starting to be nighttime, if you see a little bit of like Florida and the East Coast. So this would be the evening for us, about sunset. The sun is shining on this half of the Earth. And when the sun is shining directly on half the Earth, that's daytime in that part of the world. Now let's flip to the other side. You'll notice that I've shaded it darker. You'll notice that the sun isn't directly shining light onto that part of the Earth. That's when we experience nighttime. So scientists, the Earth is constantly spinning. It's constantly rotating on its axis, as we showed with the globe. It's spinning. As it spins, some parts experience daylight. So right now, for example, since there's light in front of me, we'll play this off. It's currently daylight in Africa and part of Europe and Asia. Daylight, daylight, daylight. Now as this Earth spins, now it becomes day in North America and South America, where Asia and Europe and Africa are experiencing nighttime. And it continues to rotate, right? We're hitting sunrise in Asia, sunrise in Europe, sunrise in Africa, daytime, daytime, daytime. Sun is starting to set in Asia, Europe, and Africa, and the sun is rising in North America, South America. And I keep forgetting about Australia. Sun is rising in Russia up here, China, Asia, Australia. It's a pattern, right? So scientists, again, when we're experiencing daylight on our half of the globe, the other half of the globe is experiencing nighttime. And that's really interesting, right? Now, I put a little reference here. So as the Earth rotates on its axis, one side faces the sun and experiences daylight. The other side doesn't face the sun and experiences nighttime. Now, scientists, you've probably noticed that the sun follows a specific pattern in the sky, and that's intentional. When we wake up, right, when it's sunrise, the sun's always gonna rise in the east and set in the west. And that's because of how the Earth is spinning on its axis. It's always gonna rise in the east and set in the west. Now you may notice during our different seasons, which we'll talk more about next week, that sometimes the sun appears to be higher in the sky in some seasons and then lower in the sky in some seasons. And we'll talk all about why that is next week. But for this week, we were focused on day, night, axis, and rotate. So to recap, let's recap this whole thing. First and foremost, the Earth spins on an axis, or it rotates. Now the axis is that imaginary line that runs from the North Pole straight through the globe to the South Pole. So here, where my finger's at, and here. That's our axis, Earth's axis. And the Earth spins on that axis. Now when the Earth is facing the sun, when the side of the Earth is facing the sun, we get daylight. When that part of the Earth is not facing the sun, we get nighttime. And scientists, do you remember how many hours it takes the Earth to do a full rotation? 24. Do you remember the specific number I said earlier? 23.93, but we round that up to 24. So 24 hours in a day, and that gives us our daytime and our nighttime. Now, scientists, there's a misconception. Misconception means that people think something that isn't necessarily correct. you may hear people say it's day, right? It's the day out. Technically, a day, scientists, is 24 hours. So the misconception is that a day is 24 hours, not just when the sun is shining, okay? So if you hear someone say, you know, what is the day like? That really just means what's it like outside during the daylight. Does that make sense? So there's 24 hours in a day. Part of those hours we spend in daylight, which is just how many hours we're getting direct sunlight, or when the sun is approaching in the east and setting in the west. And then the other part of the day we experience nighttime, when the sun is facing away from us. And when the sun is facing away from us, that means across the globe, other countries and other people, just like you and me, are experiencing the opposite. So if we're experiencing day, they're experiencing night. Daylight, they're experiencing night. And if we're experiencing night, they're experiencing daylight. So, scientists, as we move forward for next week, we're gonna start to talk about this word called revolve and revolution. And I don't want us to get confused with revolution and rotate. So again, rotate is to spin on an axis, right? That's an imaginary line that runs through something and it rotates. You and me, we can rotate. We pretend that there's a pole that runs through our head, down through our spine. We can rotate. We can spin. So think about, as you're going through every day, maybe start to track. When does the sun rise and when does the sun set? How many hours of daylight are we getting right now? How many hours of night time are we getting right now? Not only will that help you to track the sun and see how much daylight we get, but that'll start to get you seeing some patterns as we move into next week and talk about seasons and talk about this word revolution. So scientists, keep track, not of hours in daylight, keep track of how many hours of nighttime we get. Should equal 24 or 23.93. And I'll see you next week.